The shuttle was small and unarmed. It drifted through the vast emptiness of space like a paper boat on a dark ocean. Inside, Tejo sat with his hands folded in his lap, watching the stars pass through the narrow window. He was not a soldier. He was not a warrior. He was a man who believed in words, and today, his words would either save his species or doom them. Earth had discovered faster-than-light travel only 12 years ago. In the grand timeline of the galaxy, that made humanity little more than a newborn, crawling across the floor while ancient civilizations watched from above. The Galaxy Council, a governing body of 42 spacefaring species, had ruled the known universe for thousands of years. They had built empires, crushed rebellions, and shaped the laws of interstellar civilization long before humans had learned to make fire. And now, reluctantly, they had invited Earth to speak. Tejo had been chosen carefully. He was not loud or aggressive. He listened before he spoke. He had grown up as a war orphan in the ruins of a city that no longer existed. And from that pain, he had built a life dedicated to peace. Supreme Commander Yuna, the most powerful military leader on Earth, had personally selected him. She trusted him more than anyone alive. Before he boarded the shuttle, Yuna had stood with him on the launch deck. She was a tall woman with sharp eyes and a face that rarely showed emotion. But that day, something flickered behind her gaze. She grabbed his hand and held it tight. "Come back alive," she said. "That is an order." Tejo smiled. "I always follow orders." She did not smile back. The citadel appeared through the viewport like a floating mountain of metal and light. It was enormous, stretching across the blackness of space in every direction. Thousands of ships surrounded it, belonging to dozens of species. Tejo's shuttle was the smallest thing in the sky. He landed in a docking bay large enough to hold a city. Alien guards escorted him through corridors made of dark stone and glowing crystal. Every species he passed looked at him differently. Some were curious. Some were confused. Most looked at him the way a person looks at an insect that has wandered into their home. The council chamber was a massive circular room with seats rising in tiers around a central platform. 42 delegations sat in their places. At the top, on a throne carved from black stone, sat High Chancellor Vorath Ilan. He was a towering creature with 6 eyes, dark-scaled skin, and a mouth full of teeth that never seemed to close all the way. He belonged to the Dominari, one of the oldest and most powerful species in the galaxy. He looked down at Tejo the way a mountain looks down at a pebble. Tejo stepped onto the platform. He was alone. No guards, no weapons. Just a man, in a simple gray uniform, standing before the rulers of the galaxy. He spoke clearly and without fear. He offered trade. He offered cultural exchange. He offered friendship and mutual respect. He spoke about Earth and its people, their struggles and their dreams, their wars and their recoveries, and the hope that had driven them to reach for the stars. He did not beg. He did not boast. He simply told the truth. When he finished, silence filled the chamber. Then slowly, several delegates began to nod. A few even tapped their seats in approval, which was the galactic equivalent of applause. The Fen delegate, a soft-spoken being called Lian Os, looked at Tejo with something close to admiration. But Vorath did not nod. He did not tap. He stared at Tejo with all 6 of his eyes and said nothing. Later that night, when the chamber had emptied and the delegates had returned to their quarters, Vorath called a secret meeting. Only his most loyal allies attended. His military advisor, a cold and narrow-faced Dominari named Tessic, stood at his side. "They breed like insects," Vorath said, his voice low and rough. "They adapt too quickly. They learn too fast. In 100 years they will challenge us. In 200, they will try to replace us." Tessic nodded. "They are weak now. They will not always be." Vorath made his decision. It was not a decision born from evidence or justice. It was born from fear, the oldest and most dangerous emotion in the universe. The next morning, Teho was summoned back to the council chamber, for what he was told would be a formal welcome ceremony. He dressed carefully, smoothed his uniform, and walked through the corridors with a hopeful heart. He thought about Yuna. He thought about going home. He thought about the future he was building. He never saw the guards coming. They seized him in the middle of the chamber. His small crew of 5 was dragged in from the docking bay. The delegates watched in shock as Tessic stood on the platform and announced that the humans had been caught engaging in espionage against the council. It was a lie. Everyone knew it was a lie, but no one spoke. Teho was forced to his knees. His hands were bound behind his back. Blood ran down his face from where a guard had struck him. He looked up at Vorath, who watched from his throne with no expression at all. The execution was broadcast to every world in the galaxy. 42 civilizations watched as Teho and his crew were killed one by one on the floor of the council chamber. It was meant to be a warning. It was meant to show the galaxy what happened to species that reached too high. Teho was the last to die. He did not scream. He did not cry. He looked straight into the broadcast camera and spoke his final words in a voice that was steady and clear. Not because of what I am, but because of what they will become. Then he was gone. 12 hours later, the footage reached Earth. It played on every screen in the United Earth Coalition Command Center. Officers, analysts, and soldiers stood frozen, watching the man they had sent to speak for all of humanity die on his knees in front of aliens who laughed. When the screen went black, no one moved, no one breathed. Yuna stood at the center of the room. Her face was perfectly still. Her hands hung at her sides. She stared at the dark screen for a long time. Then she spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper, but every person in that room heard it like thunder. Wake up, Jinwoo. Tell him it is time. The world did not explode with anger. There were no riots. There were no screaming crowds or burning flags. What happened on Earth after the footage played was something far more dangerous than rage. A deep, cold, unified silence spread across the entire planet like frost across glass. Every nation watched the same footage. Every leader saw the same thing. A good man, a kind man, a man who had gone to the stars carrying nothing but words and hope, was murdered on his knees while the galaxy watched and did nothing. And in that silence, something changed inside the human race. Every old argument, every political divide, every petty disagreement between nations dissolved in the span of a single night. There was no debate. There was no discussion. There was only one feeling shared by every living person on Earth, and that feeling had no name, but it tasted like iron and smelled like fire. The United Earth Coalition held an emergency summit. Representatives from every nation attended. The session lasted exactly 11 minutes. The vote was unanimous. Full wartime authority was granted to Supreme Commander Yuna. She did not hold a press conference. She simply stood, nodded once, and walked out of the room. Her first stop was not the war room. It was not the fleet command. It was a quiet laboratory buried 60 meters beneath the streets of Seoul, in a bunker that officially did not exist. Jinwoo was already waiting for her. He was a thin man with tired eyes and gentle hands, the kind of man who looked like he should be teaching at a university instead of building weapons that could end civilizations. He had not slept since the footage aired. When Yuna sat down across from him, he looked at her for a long time before speaking. "You want me to open the file?" he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she said. Jinwoo closed his eyes for a moment. Then he turned to his console and entered a series of codes that had never been used before. A file appeared on the screen. Its name was simple and cold. Annihilation Protocol. It had been designed years ago, during the earliest days of faster-than-light travel, when Earth's brightest minds realized that the universe might not be friendly. It was a contingency plan, a last resort, built by people who hoped it would never be needed. Jinwoo had led its creation. He was the only person alive who fully understood what it could do. He walked Yuna through it, his voice quiet and steady. Phase 1 was called Deadlight. It was a communications weapon, designed to sever all quantum leap connections within an entire star system. Every ship, every station, every relay would go dark simultaneously. No signals in or out. It would be like cutting the nerves of a living body. The target would not be destroyed, but it would be completely blind and deaf. Phase 2 was called Glass Rain. It used compressed dark matter slugs, fired from orbital platforms at incredible speed. When they struck a surface, they generated heat so intense that rock, metal, and soil melted into glass within seconds. An entire planet's surface could be turned into a smooth, glowing wasteland in a matter of hours. It was designed for military targets, but it could be aimed at anything. Phase 3 was called Final Verse. Jinwoo's voice dropped when he spoke about it. It was a self-replicating nanite swarm, a cloud of microscopic machines that consumed all organic and synthetic matter in their path. Once released, they could not be stopped. They could not be recalled. They would eat everything until there was nothing left. A planet, a system, a species, gone. It was not a weapon. It was extinction in a bottle. When he finished, the room was silent. Yuna stared at the screen for a long time. If we use Phase 3, Jinwoo said, there is no going back. Not for them, not for us. We will not be the same species after. We stopped being the same species the moment they killed him. She stood and left the room without another word. Jinwoo sat alone in the dim light of the bunker, staring at the file on his screen. He thought about Taeho. He thought about the kind of man who walks into a room full of monsters, with nothing but a smile and a handshake. And he thought about what the monsters had done to that man. He did not close the file. 3 floors above, Intelligence Director Hana was already at work. She was a woman who saw patterns where others saw noise. Within hours of the execution, she had pulled every piece of data Earth had on the Galaxy Council, its member species, its military strength, its internal politics, and its weaknesses. And she found plenty of weaknesses. The Council looked powerful from the outside, but inside it was rotten with rivalry and resentment. Many species had been bullied into loyalty by the Dominari. Others stayed only because they feared being alone. Hana identified the Fen delegate, Lian Os, as a key fracture point. The Fen were a peaceful species who had never supported Voroff's aggressive leadership. If pushed, they would break away, and others would follow. She brought her findings to Yuna, who listened carefully and filed the information away like a blade being sharpened for later use. Meanwhile, Suji came to Yuna with a request. She was young, barely 26, and she had been Taeho's student. He had trained her in diplomacy, taught her how to listen, how to read a room, how to find common ground with anyone. She had been supposed to go with him on the mission. A last-minute reassignment had kept her on Earth. She had watched him die on a screen, and had not stopped shaking since. "Let me carry the ultimatum," she said. "Let me go to the Citadel. Let me stand where he stood." Yuna studied her for a long moment. She saw the grief in Suji's eyes, but she also saw something harder underneath it. Something that would not break. "If they kill you too," Yuna said quietly, "there will be no Phase 1, there will be no Phase 2, We skipped straight to the end. Suji nodded. Then they had better listen. Across Earth's orbit, something began to happen that no alien eye was watching. 400 warships powered on for the first time. They had been built in secret, hidden inside hollowed-out asteroids and abandoned stations. They were not beautiful ships. They were not elegant or decorative. They were dark, angular and brutal, designed for one purpose and one purpose only. Vice Admiral Dohwan stood on the bridge of his destroyer and watched the fleet come to life around him. He was a large man with a loud voice and a reputation for saying exactly what he meant. He cracked his knuckles and grinned. On every screen across the planet, a single message appeared. UEF Response Fleet. Operation Quiet Night. Departure in 48 hours. Dohwan leaned back in his chair and smiled at the stars. Let us go introduce ourselves. The shuttle that arrived at the Citadel was the same model as the one Taeho had flown. Same size, same shape, same lack of weapons. The Galaxy Council sensors confirmed it immediately. One small ship, one life sign, no shields, no guns, nothing. Vorath Ilin received the report on his throne and laughed so hard that the sound echoed through the chamber. He turned to Tessik, his military advisor, and shook his massive head. They sent another one. They actually sent another one. His 6 eyes blinked with amusement. Humans truly are the stupidest creatures in the galaxy. Tessik did not laugh. Something about the situation made his skin crawl, though he could not explain why. Suji docked her shuttle in the same bay Taeho had used. She stepped out alone. She wore the same gray uniform he had worn. Her hair was pulled back tight, and her face showed nothing. No fear, no anger, nothing at all. The alien guards who escorted her through the corridors noticed that she walked with the steady rhythm of someone who had already accepted whatever was going to happen next. She was brought to the council chamber. Every seat was filled. 42 delegations watched as this small human woman stepped onto the central platform, standing in the exact spot where Taeho had knelt and bled. The floor had been cleaned, but Suji could feel it beneath her feet. She could feel him. Vorath leaned forward on his throne. Have you come to beg for your dead? Suji did not answer him. She did not even look at him. Instead, she reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out a small device. She placed it on the platform and pressed a single button. A voice filled the chamber. It was not Suji's voice. It was Yuna's. The recording played clearly and without static. Every word was precise, measured, and cold. But underneath the control there was something that made several delegates shift in their seats. It was the voice of a woman who had already decided what she was willing to do, and was simply giving the galaxy one final chance to stop her. To the species of the Galaxy Council. You murdered our envoy. He came to you with open hands, and you cut them off. We gave you the best of us, and you sent him back in pieces. So now hear this. You have 72 standard hours to surrender High Chancellor Vorath Ilin and military advisor Tessik to human custody. Disband the current council leadership. Issue a formal apology to the people of Earth. Broadcast on every channel you use to show his death. Failure to comply will be interpreted as a declaration of war against the human species. There was a pause in the recording. Then Yuna's voice returned, lower and harder. And we do not lose wars. We end them. The recording stopped. The chamber was silent. Then the noise began. Delegates shouted over each other. Some demanded that Suji be arrested immediately. Others called for emergency sessions. A few sat perfectly still, staring at the platform with wide eyes, calculating odds they did not like. Vorath rose from his throne. He was enormous, nearly 3 meters tall, and when he spoke, his voice crushed the chaos into silence. You come into our house, he said, pointing one clawed finger at Suji, and you threaten us? Your species is 12 years old. We have ruled this galaxy for 10,000 years. You are nothing. Suji looked up at him. Her voice was calm and clear. Teho said something similar before you killed him. He said you would regret it. He was a kind man, so he gave you a warning. I am not as kind as he was. This is not a warning. This is a countdown. She turned and walked off the platform. No one stopped her. Behind the scenes, the Citadel erupted into chaos. Vorath immediately contacted the Korath Hegemony, the most powerful military force in the galaxy outside the Council itself. Warlord Dravik Mon answered the call from the bridge of his flagship. He was a scarred, massive creature covered in bone-like armor plates, and he had spent his entire life conquering smaller species. He listened to Vorath's request and grinned with a mouth full of broken teeth. I will handle your human problem, Dravik said. My fleet outnumbers theirs 10 to 1. I will burn their sun and scatter their ash across the void. Vorath also rallied 3 other militant species to the cause. Together, they assembled an armada of over 4,000 warships. It was the largest military force the galaxy had gathered in centuries. They positioned themselves along the border of council space and waited for the countdown to expire. Meanwhile, Lian Os, the Fen delegate, found Suji in the docking bay. The Fen were small, soft-bodied beings with large dark eyes and translucent skin. They were known for their intelligence and their hatred of violence. Lian Os spoke quickly and quietly. Several of us want no part in this, Lian said. The Fen, the Osari, the Pale Collective. We never supported what Vorath did to your envoy. It was murder, and we all know it. Suji listened, but did not soften. Then when the time comes, stay out of our way. Lian hesitated. What are you going to do? Suji looked at the stars through the docking bay window. Whatever we have to. The 72 hours passed slowly. On Earth, the fleet was already moving. 400 warships crossed into deep space in perfect formation, running silent, running dark. On the Citadel, delegates argued and panicked. Some tried to convince Vorath to negotiate. He refused every time. On the bridge of the Black Horizon, Earth's flagship dreadnought, Captain Minho stood with his hands behind his back and watched the clock count down. He was a quiet man who rarely spoke more than necessary. His crew respected him not because he was loud, but because he was never wrong. Beside him, Communications Officer Nari sat at her console, her fingers hovering over the broadcast controls. She was young, barely older than Suji, but her hands were steady. The clock hit 0. Minho looked at Nari and nodded once. Nari opened every channel she could reach, broadcasting on frequencies that the Council used, frequencies they had forgotten, and frequencies they did not even know existed. Her voice was professional and even. Citadel Command, this is the United Earthship Black Horizon. Your silence has been received. Commencing Operation Quiet Night. Then she pressed another button. Phase 1 activated. Across 3 star systems, every quantum link relay went dark at the same moment. Communication stations, military networks, navigation beacons, emergency channels, all of it collapsed in less than 4 seconds. The backbone of the Council's entire coordination infrastructure, the system that connected their fleets, their governments, and their people, was gone. Not damaged, not disrupted. Gone. As if it had never existed. On the Citadel, screens went black, signals died. The hum of 1,000 connected systems was replaced by a silence so deep, it felt like the universe itself had stopped breathing. On the Korath flagship, Warlord Dravik Mon stared at his tactical display. Every indicator, every contact, every piece of data had vanished. His fleet of 4,000 ships was suddenly alone in the dark, blind, deaf, and cut off from everything. For the first time in his 200-year military career, Dravik Mon felt something he did not recognize. It started in his chest and spread outward like cold water. It was fear. The galaxy had imagined many versions of how a war with humanity would look. In every version, the humans lost. They were too young, too small, too few. The numbers were simple. The Korath alone had 4,000 warships. Earth had 400. The math did not require discussion. But the galaxy had made a mistake. It had counted ships. It had not counted what was inside them. The first engagement happened at the Korath border, in a region of space filled with dead moons and drifting asteroid fields. Dravik Mon had managed to reorganize his blinded fleet using short-range light signals and old radio frequencies. It was slow and clumsy, but the Korath were warriors, and warriors adapted. By the time the human fleet arrived, Dravik had assembled his armada into a massive wall of metal and firepower. He stood on the bridge of his flagship and bared his broken teeth at the darkness ahead. "Let them come," he said. They came. Captain Minho led the Vanguard from the bridge of the Black Horizon. The human fleet did not charge forward in a straight line. They did not form a wall to match the Korath wall. Instead, they split into dozens of small groups that moved fast and unpredictably, weaving through the asteroid fields like schools of fish through coral. The Korath fired their heavy cannons, weapons designed to destroy capital ships with a single blast. They hit asteroids, they hit empty space, they hit each other. The human ships were smaller, faster, and meaner than anything the Korath had ever faced. They darted between the gaps in the Korath formation and struck from angles that should not have been possible. Their weapons were not the most powerful in the galaxy, but they were precise. Every shot hit something important: engines, shield generators, ammunition stores, communication arrays that the Korath had just barely managed to repair. But it was not the weapons that terrified the Korath. It was what happened when the human ships were damaged. A Korath cruiser crippled a human destroyer with a direct hit to its midsection. The destroyer broke in half, venting atmosphere and fire into the void. Any other species would have abandoned ship. The humans did not. The front half of the destroyer fired its remaining engines and rammed directly into the cruiser's bridge at full speed. Both ships exploded in a ball of white light. Escape pods launched from another dying human vessel. The Korath ignored them, focusing on the active warships. That was a mistake. The escape pods were armed. They detonated against the hulls of 3 Korath battleships, crippling their shields and leaving them open for the next wave of human fighters. Even the debris was dangerous. When human ships broke apart, the wreckage was seeded with microcharges that exploded when salvage drones tried to collect it. The Korath learned this the hard way, when an entire salvage carrier detonated from the inside. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the Korath armada was shattered. Over 3,000 ships were destroyed or disabled. Wreckage stretched across the entire sector like a metal graveyard. The human fleet had lost 112 ships. Every crew that died had taken at least 5 enemy vessels with them. Vice Admiral Dohan led the boarding of Dravik Mon's flagship personally. He took 30 soldiers and cut through the ship deck by deck. The Korath warriors fought hard, but Dohan's team fought harder. They moved with a precision and aggression that the Korath had never encountered. These were not soldiers fighting for territory or resources. These were soldiers fighting for a dead man who had believed in peace, and that made them something the galaxy had no word for. Dohan found Dravik on the bridge, surrounded by the bodies of his personal guard. The warlord was wounded but still standing. He drew his blade, a weapon made from the bones of a conquered species, and charged. The fight was short. Dohan was faster. He disarmed Dravik with 2 strikes and pinned the massive alien to the deck with a boot on his chest. Dravik stared up at him with wide, disbelieving eyes. "Your fleet outnumbered us," Doan said calmly. "Your ships were bigger, your guns were stronger. But you made one mistake. You gave us a reason." Dravik was taken prisoner. Within hours, the Korath hegemony surrendered. A civilization that had conquered dozens of worlds across centuries of warfare had been broken in a single day by a species that was 12 years old. But the war was not over. 3 other militant species, allied with Vorath, refused to stand down. They had watched the battle at the Korath border and decided that it was a fluke. Humanity had gotten lucky. It would not happen twice. Yuna did not give them a second battle. She gave them Phase 2. Glass rain activated at dawn across 3 star systems simultaneously. Compressed dark matter slugs launched from orbital platforms that the enemy had not even detected. The slugs moved at speeds that made them invisible to standard sensors. When they struck, they did not explode. They converted kinetic energy into heat so extreme that everything within the impact zone melted into smooth, glowing glass. Military stations dissolved. Orbital shipyards turned into rivers of molten metal. Weapons factories that had operated for hundreds of years became flat, shining planes of glass that reflected the light of their own dying stars. The destruction was total, absolute, and precise. But Yuna had given strict orders. Only military targets. No civilian worlds. No population centers. No schools, hospitals, or homes. Every single slug was aimed with careful, deliberate accuracy at the machines of war and nothing else. She wanted the galaxy to see the difference. She wanted them to understand that humanity was not like Vorath. They did not kill the helpless. They did not murder the unarmed. But they would erase every weapon pointed at them without hesitation or mercy. The 3 militant species surrendered within hours. Their governments broadcast messages of unconditional capitulation on whatever communication channels they could still find working. Back at the Citadel, the situation had collapsed into panic. Vorath tried to rally the remaining council members, but the chamber was half empty. Ships launched from the Citadel's docking bays every few minutes, carrying diplomats and officials desperate to distance themselves from the losing side. Leonos, the Fen delegate, made a formal announcement. The Fen were breaking from the Galaxy Council, effective immediately, and opening direct communication with Earth to request peace. Within hours, 12 other species followed, then 15, then 20. The Council was dissolving like sugar in hot water. Hana, working from her intelligence station aboard the Black Horizon, intercepted a coded transmission. Vorath and Tessic were not waiting for the end. They were running. A private ship had launched from the Citadel's lowest docking level, heading for a hidden bunker in a dead star system, far from any trade route or patrol path. She sent the coordinates to Yuna, along with a single question. Orders? Find them. On the Citadel, Suji stood alone in the observation deck, watching through the viewport as distant flashes of light marked the end of another fleet that had chosen to fight instead of surrender. Each flash was brief and bright, like a match being struck and blown out. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small pendant, a tiny steel sphere shaped like the Earth. Tejo had given it to her the day before his mission. He had pressed it into her palm and said, "Hold on to this for me. I will want it back when I return." She closed her fingers around it and held it against her chest. "We are almost there," she whispered to no one. "We are almost there." The dead star system had no name. It did not appear on any official map. The star at its center had burned out long ago, leaving behind a cold, dark dwarf that gave off no light and no warmth. It was the kind of place where things went to be forgotten. That was exactly why Vorath had built his bunker there. The station was carved into the core of a massive asteroid, reinforced with layers of armor plating and shielded by technology that made it nearly invisible to long-range sensors. It had its own power supply, its own air recyclers, and enough supplies to sustain a small crew for decades. It was designed to survive the end of everything. It was not designed to survive humanity. Hana had traced the bunker's location through a chain of intercepted signals, financial records, and supply shipments that Vorath had thought were untraceable. She had found the thread and pulled until the whole thing unraveled. When she presented the coordinates to Yuna, she also presented a detailed layout of the station's defenses. 200 armed guards, automated weapons platforms, multiple layers of blast doors. Yuna forwarded everything to Minho and Doan. "Bring them back alive," she said. "I want them to stand trial. I want the galaxy to watch." The black horizon dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the dead system. Behind it, 12 assault ships followed in tight formation. They moved without running lights, dark shapes against a dark sky, invisible until they were already on top of you. Minho directed the operation from the bridge, while Doan led the boarding team. 60 soldiers in heavy assault armor loaded into breaching pods. Doan checked his weapon, looked at his team, and said only one thing. "No speeches, just get it done." They crossed the distance to the asteroid in silence, guided by precision targeting that placed them exactly where Hana's intelligence said the station's armor was thinnest. They hit the surface and burned through in seconds. The fight inside the station was brutal and close. The corridors were narrow, and the defenders fought with the desperation of people who knew there was nowhere left to run. Automated turrets filled the hallways with fire. Guards ambushed the human soldiers at every turn. But Dohan's team moved through the station like water through cracks in stone. They advanced room by room, corridor by corridor, clearing each section with ruthless efficiency. When a turret blocked their path, they did not fall back. They pushed forward, absorbing losses and pressing through until the turret was destroyed and the way was clear. Their losses were not small, but they did not stop. They could not be stopped. Tessic was found in a communications room on the station's upper level. He was trying to send a final transmission, a distress call to anyone who might still listen. No one answered. His fleet was gone. His allies had surrendered. The galaxy had moved on without him. When the soldiers breached the door, Tessic stood and faced them. His expression was cold and proud. He did not raise his hands. He did not kneel. Doan walked in and looked at him. Tessic spoke first. "You may have won this war, human, but you will be feared and hated for it. Every species in the galaxy will look at you and see monsters." Doan shrugged. "Good. Fear keeps people honest." Tessic was restrained and taken to the breaching pods. Vorath was deeper inside the station, in the lowest and most protected chamber. It took another hour to reach him. The final set of blast doors required explosives to open. When the smoke cleared and the soldiers moved in, they found the High Chancellor alone. He was sitting in a chair, surrounded by screens. Every screen showed the same footage playing on a loop. The execution of Teho. Vorath was watching it, but not with triumph, not with satisfaction. His 6 eyes were dull and distant. His massive body was slumped forward. He looked like a creature that had finally understood the weight of what it had done and found that weight too heavy to carry. He did not resist when the soldiers bound his wrists. He did not speak as they led him through the ruined corridors of his own bunker. He simply walked, his eyes on the floor, his silence louder than anything he could have said. Vorath was brought aboard the Black Horizon and taken to a holding cell. Yuna came to see him, alone. She stood on one side of the barrier. He sat on the other. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then, Yuna pressed a button on her device. Teho's voice filled the cell. His final words, recorded from the execution broadcast. You will regret this, not because of what I am, but because of what they will become. The recording ended. Yuna looked at Vorath and asked one question. Was it worth it? Vorath opened his mouth. Then he closed it. He had no answer. There was no answer. He had killed a man who came with open hands, and in doing so, he had destroyed everything he had built across 10,000 years. The council was gone. His fleet was glass. His allies were prisoners or cowards, and the species he had tried to crush before they could grow had grown anyway, not over centuries, but over weeks. He lowered his head and said nothing. Vorath and Tessic were handed over to a joint tribunal, organized by the surviving council species in partnership with Earth. The trial was broadcast across the galaxy, on the same channels that had carried the execution. Every species that had watched Taeho die now watched his killers face justice. They were convicted and sentenced to permanent confinement. Earth did not execute them. This was deliberate. Yuna made a statement that was broadcast alongside the verdict. We are not merciful because we are weak. We are merciful because we choose to be. Do not ever test that choice again. The galaxy heard her. The galaxy believed her. In the weeks that followed, the Galaxy Council was restructured from the ground up. Earth was given a permanent seat, not out of admiration or friendship, but out of something more honest and more durable. It was the raw, primal understanding that humanity was not a species to be provoked. They were young, they were small, and they could end everything if pushed far enough. That knowledge settled into the bones of every civilization, like a second gravity. Leonos was elected as the new council chancellor. The Fen delegate, who had whispered warnings in the corridors of the old citadel, now led the galaxy into a new and cautious era of diplomacy. One of the first acts of the new council was to build a memorial on the citadel floor, in the exact spot where Taeho had been killed. It was not grand or decorative. It was a simple steel plaque set into the stone, engraved with his final words. Suji was appointed as Earth's permanent ambassador to the council. She accepted the role quietly and without ceremony. Every day, she wore the steel pendant around her neck. Every day, she stood where he had stood, and spoke with the same calm, clear voice. She was not Taeho, but she carried everything he had believed in, and that was enough. Jinwoo returned to his laboratory beneath Seoul. He locked the codes for Phase 3, the final verse, behind every layer of security he could design. When Yuna visited him one last time, he looked up at her with tired eyes. I hope no one ever opens that file again, he said. They will not, Yuna replied, because now they know it exists. She left the bunker and returned to the Black Horizon. The war was over. The fleet was standing down. Ships were returning to Earth. Soldiers were going home. Yuna did not go home. She went to her quarters aboard the ship, closed the door, and stood by the viewport. The stars stretched out before her, cold and endless and indifferent. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a photograph, old and creased and faded. It showed two children standing in the rubble of a destroyed city, a boy and a girl. The boy was smiling. The girl was holding his hand. Taeho and Yuna, 8 years old, standing in the ruins of post-war Seoul, alive against all odds, holding on to each other because they had no one else. She pressed the photograph against her chest and closed her eyes. She had kept her promise. She had not brought his body home, but she had brought his meaning home. The galaxy would not remember Taeho as the man who died on his knees. They would remember him as the reason humanity rose to its feet. Every memorial, every treaty, every moment of peace that followed would carry his name like a heartbeat underneath it all. And in the cold mathematics of the stars, where civilizations rose and fell like tides, that was enough.